Okay, first of all, can you all hear me all right?
Yes,
Yeah,
Doctor.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, Bismillah. So the last 5 weeks, we've been looking at comparative literature as a theory, as a field of study. You know, we're looking at the definition, we're looking at the what is comparative literature, how is comparative literature seen historically, you know, in the 20th century, now in the 21st century. What is the methodology when we talk about comparative literature? How do we do the comparative element of the study of literature? What is the approach taken? And the definition actually helps inform the selection of corpus, you know, as well as the methodology. The French school differs from the American school in terms of its approach. Yeah. In terms of text selection, do we allow translated text? Do we allow text to be read in translation across time and space? Or does it have to be in its original? So those are the theoretical elements of comparative literature as a discipline. So that was the first first third of the semester, if you like. And you have already done an assignment on your take in terms of theoretically, based on the review of literature, what is your statement, if you like, right? Based on the video essay that you have done. And each of you had your own take. The next 2/3 of the semester, we're going to start to apply this understanding, this theoretical understanding of comparative literature as a discipline. We're going to apply that to the study of text across time and space. Okay, and this is what Susan Bassnett in her 1993 book talked about in terms of parameter. So the approach that we take is based on the parameter that we use as a form of comparison. Okay, so for today's class, this is the first application session, if you like. So we're going to go into it gradually. We're going to look at it in its broad terms. When we think about literature, when you read a literary work, one of the first questions you ask after asking questions, the fundamental questions like what is the story about, what's the plot, where is this set, you know, what's the place setting, what's the time setting, who are the characters, what's the conflict, what's the issue that is being discussed, and finally, what's the theme that this story seems to capture, you know, as a microcosm of the story. And then at the more macro level, what is the theme that this story seems to problematize through the narrative? Okay, so for today's class, I'm going to introduce a possible theme, which is identity politics. So we're going to look at the suggestion, you know, in terms of a possible theme. Parameter number 1, if you like, is comparative literature in the age of identity politics. So the possible theme comes from the reader. So in this case, I am suggesting this theme as parameter number 1, which is comparative literature as a methodology is by looking at the thematic reading across time and space. And the first suggestion for theme is identity politics. We'll explore that in a minute. So just to kind of like come back, touch base, you know, I've got 2 important reminders based on the last 5 sessions we've had, 5 weeks we've had. The reminder number 1, this is a recap from one of the lectures that I gave earlier in the semester. And this is a quote: every Irish ballad has already been tracked down, every chapter, you know, basically almost lovingly dissected, debated, reinterpreted. So anything that has been said about the Irish ballad has already been said. This is what this quote is saying. So the question then, as 21st century readers, what can possibly be left to say? So is there anything else that you and I, coming from our respective contexts, from China, from Iraq, from Malaysia, is there anything else that we can say if we were reading an Irish ballad, for instance? The point of connection that we can draw from is cross-cultural comparison. So the suggestion, the first reminder is, the suggestion is, as comparatives ourselves, as students of comparative literature, one way to ensure that we are presenting an original take in the discipline of comparative literature is by bringing in our cultural sensibilities to the reading of any text. And in this example, to the reading of an Irish ballad. None of us none of us here, none of us is an Irish, but our readings, be it from the Kurdish Iraqi perspective, the Chinese perspective, or the Malaysian perspective, even the Malaysian perspective, it's not homogeneous. There is heterogeneity. Each one of us have our own cultural sensibilities. Even within the Malays, there is a kind of a diversity. All right. So that is a point to remember. This is the first reminder. And the second reminder is to also come back to something that Bassnett talked about in 1993. And I quote, the comparison of one text with another without contextual reference is becoming tedious. It's unnecessary. It's just too, it doesn't seem to have any impact, right? So the second reminder is that whatever text that we are reading, we must take into consideration the context. So contextual references needs to be, the contextual references need to be part of our methodology in the reading of text across time and space. Okay, so those two reminders, just to kind of like hold our focus. Then let's move forward with the first parameter. Thematic concern across time and space. So when you think about thematic concern, the way you read a theme is as universal or as specific as your experience is. So if you come from a particular perspective, your cultural sensibilities, your religious sensibilities, your worldview, your identity as an individual, as a member of society, as a member of a particular community, as a member of a particular gender, as members of a particular social hierarchy. So you as a reader approaching a particular text will have your own take on what is the theme of this text, right? If you remember from a few weeks back when we were looking at I Too by Langston Hughes, and Identity Card by Mahmoud Darwish, when you were comparing the two texts, each of you brought a very unique perspective, right, on how the two texts is comparable. What kind of issues do you see can be compared between them? And we're going to explore that in today's session. So the first thing that I want to draw your attention to is that when we read a particular work of literature, this is something Pierre Macheret talked about in his book, A Theory of Literary Production. The article, this particular chapter, I've shared it with you also on your WhatsApp. So one of the things is, and this important quote that Macheret talks about in this chapter, the spoken and the unspoken. The book is not self-sufficient, he says. It is necessarily accompanied by a certain absence, without which it would not exist. So I just want to kind of think about that. Let's unpack that quote. Any book that you read, any poem that you're reading, any novel that you're reading, short story, whatever the text be as a work of fiction, it is not self-sufficient. What does that mean? It is not complete. There are certain quote unquote absence in the text. There are certain unspoken element in the text. And the bit that we need to explore as readers of literature, and right now we're not talking about comparative literature yet. We're just talking about being a student of literature in its entirety. This is why, and he proceeds, and I quote, "This is why it seems useful and legitimate to ask of every production what it tacitly implies, what it does not say." So, when you're reading intensively as a reader, you're not reading extensively. Reading extensively means you're reading for pleasure, like maybe you like to read before you turn in for the night. This is my practice. I just read something that does not require me doing my research. It doesn't require me to have critical engagement, But of course, when you're trained to be critically engaged with the text, even if you're reading for pleasure, you can't help but exercise some critical thinking. But when you are reading intensively, as you will be doing for the rest of the course, you need to always ask yourself the key ideas that is being implied here. What is tacitly implied? What it does not say? When you're reading a particular text, you know what the story is about, you know what the characters are, who the characters are, what the plot is, what the conflict is, and all that. But you also must ask yourself this crucial question: what does this writer not tell me? What is left unsaid in this story? What can I imply from this conversation that the writer has not elaborated? So this is our role as a reader. So the question is, what does it not say must also be taken into consideration. So when we're talking about a work of literature, when you're summarizing a work of literature, for instance, when you give the summary of the plot, the character, the conflict, the key issues, the rising action, the actions that are taking place, those are things that are clearly evident, right? Those are things that are spoken. But when you begin to do an analysis of the text, you must take into consideration elements that are not stated, things that are hinted at, things that are unspoken. Right now, it sounds very theoretical, very abstract, but when we apply this to work of literature, you will be able to see the value of asking these questions. What does this text not say? What is left unsaid? What is withheld from me as a reader? What am I not told about this context, about this situation, about the character? And we proceed. He goes on to say that through its relationship to the theoretical and ideological uses of language, the text is also influenced by formal function of the writer and by the problems of his individual existence. Specifically, literary works are determined by the history of literary production from which they receive the means of their own realization. Give you a simple example. When Langston Hughes uses the phrase, "I am the darker brother," if you read that text on its own, you're like, oh, that the person has darker complexion. You assume he is describing something literal, that the person has a darker complexion. But the unsaid, the ideological use of the language, the darker brother, the unsaid is, this brother is different from the rest, from the whiter brother, from the lighter shade brother. So the element of the use of language is used to kind of transfer certain ideological, values, certain ideological statements. This is something we as students of literature need to explore. So the use of the language, in Identity Card by Mahmoud Darwish, write it down, "I am an Arab." So that very statement, why did he have to say that? Why the need to order to make that kind of an imperative statement? What is the context of that statement? So those are the things that are unsaid, that you cannot understand the story without visualizing the context, what's happening. And that context is not stated, obviously. That context is mentioned through inference. That's not spoken, but that's part of the unspoken element of that poem. Okay. So, another aspect that we need to also ask ourselves is what is important in the work is what it does not say. So a lot of the times when we're reading stories and when somebody asks you, what's the story about? Or when you watch a film and somebody asks, what's the film about? You tell them what is mentioned, what is obvious. But Mecheray suggests that what is important in the work is what it does not say, what is not obvious, what it cannot say because of certain ideological, restrictions. It needs the author's artistic abilities to express himself or herself within these restrictions that makes the work of literature, valuable, So the absence of speech, what is concealed because of circumstances, right? What elements of prejudice is being raised in this context? You will see this in telephone conversation. We will explore that in a second. So as we read literary works, we need to ask the questions constantly. What does the writer not bring up? What sort of journey to silence, quote unquote, is captured in the literary works? That captures the concealed meaning, the hidden meaning, right? So there's a lot of unpacking to do. When you're reading a story, you read the story for what it is, but you also have to ask yourself, behind these words and these representations and these characters, what exactly is the writer trying to convey to me? That's the theme, right? So getting to the core of the theme is not as easy as just telling the storyline, the plot, the character. So this is something I just want to remind us. I'm sure you are familiar. I'm just trying to remind you of this. So let's begin with this text. Let's see this in action. Consider what is the unsaid in the poem Telephone Conversation by Wole Soyinka. So I hope you've had chance to read it. This is something I came across yesterday. If you're not familiar with this, yesterday at a webinar, I came across this, that if you use Microsoft Edge as a Google search, I'm not promoting any search engine, but I just found out yesterday that if you use Microsoft Edge as a Google search, you can you have something, once you Google whatever text you want, you've got something called Immersive Reader as a added feature. So if I clicked on the Immersive Reader here, can you all see this button that I'm showing?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, doctor.
So if you click on the Immersive Reader, two things happen. Number one, all the advertisements is removed. Okay. And number two, even more valuable, is you've got this read out loud button. So it's a kind of neat feature, especially for those of us doing literature where you need something visualized. The text needs to come to life for you, right? Sometimes when you're reading it, you might get the pronunciation slightly off. You might get the flow slightly off. And it's nice to have somebody read it to you. So, I thought it would be nice for us to explore that. So this is something for us to consider. If the text doesn't have any advertisement such as this, so you don't have the Immersive Reader button, you right click on that screen and you can have the Read Out Loud button. You can have the feature there. So, I'm not going to explore the button today, but I'm just giving you an option because I feel that this would be necessary. And as an auditory reader myself, I don't read very well personally. Yeah, I don't read very well on my own. I am a very slow reader. It's something that I'm still working on. So I have been using my iPad to kind of facilitate my reading. So iPad has the read out loud feature, But when I came across this at a webinar yesterday that I moderated, when the speaker talked about using Microsoft Edge and being able to have this read out loud, I thought, oh, brilliant! This is exactly what I need, because then you can read, literary texts, you can read journal articles, you can read various things. Like say for instance, I picked up a particular article, and I picked on the immersive button, and then I could read the text out loud. So I'm just showing you as an example here. So for today's text, we've got telephone conversation. So is there anybody who would like to read this for me? I need 2 people. Anybody? Hello?
I can do it first.
Who is that? Is that Ruby?
Yes, it's me.
Okay. All right. Ruby, you will read the text, okay? But I need someone to read the bits in large caps. So the bits in caps, Ruby wouldn't read, and I need somebody to read those. So it's not that many. Shall I read that, or would somebody like to read it? Okay, let's not waste time. All right, so Ruby, go ahead. You start, and every time it comes to the bit that's large cap, these capital letters, I will read them. Because
All
basically there's 2 voices in this poem. All right, we'll get into that in a minute. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. All right, sorry. The price seemed reasonable. Location, indifferent. The landlady swore she lived off premises. Nothing remained but self-confession. Madam, I warned, I hate a wasted journey. I am African. Silence. Silenced transmission of pressurized good breeding. Voice when it came. Lipstick coated, long gold rolled. Cigarette holder peeped. Caught I was foully.
How dark?
I had not misheard.
Are you light or very dark?
Button B, button A, stench of rancid breath of public hide and speak. Red booth, red pillar box, red double-tiered omnibus squelching tar. It was real, shamed by ill-mannered silence, surrender, pushed dumbfoundment to back simplification. Considerate she was, varying the emphasis.
Are you dark or very light?
Revelation came. You mean like plain or milk chocolate? Her accent was clinical, crushing in its light impersonality, rapidly wavelength adjusted. I chose West African Sophia, and as afterthought, down in my passport, silence for spectroscopic flight or fancy, till truthfulness changed her accent. Is it changed or charged? Hard on the mouthpiece,
What's that?
conceding.
Don't know what that is.
Like brunette.
That's dark, isn't it?
Not altogether. Facially, I am brunette. But madam, you should see the rest of me. Palm of my hand, soles of my feet are a peroxide blonde. Friction caused. Foolishly, madam, by sitting down, has turned my bottom raven black. One moment, madam, sensing her receiver rearing on the thunderclap about my ears. Madam, I pleaded, wouldn't you rather see for yourself?
Thank you very much. Well read. Okay, I would like to see, I think I want to come back to the screen. Thank you very much. So if you all can have your screens open just for a second, it'd be nice to kind of have a conversation where we can see each other's faces. Yeah. Okay, initial thoughts. What do you think the poem was about?
I think it's about discrimination of African American.
Okay, what else? But this is not in the context of African American, because Wole Soyinka is a Nigerian, and this is,
Oh,
if you look at the poem, examples of setting will tell you this is set in UK. It's got the omnibus bus, it's got the double-decker red bus, it's got the red pillar, the phone booth. What's the key word? It's got the setting. It's got, can you Google right now? Red pillar, no, red booth, phone booth. Okay, sorry, I'm sharing screen. Just a second. So, these kinds of phone booths, okay? He's basically in the phone booth. He's talking, he's making an appointment to come and meet this person. He's in the phone booth. So this is long before the handphone and all the rest of it. So he's inside, and there are lots of buttons. He's pressing the buttons, I wish there was a picture of the inside. So this is usually by the side of the road, and you will see buses passing by. The double-decker buses will be passing by, and then you will have the phone booth by the side of the road. So he's basically inside the phone booth, talking to her, and he sees the omnibus passing by. He sees various things happening around him. So that indicates this is the UK, not the US. Also, if you know a little bit about Wole Soyinka, if you do exploration and you study a little bit about Wole Soyinka, you know he was also in the UK in that time and all that. So, but African in a non-African context, that's for sure. So I list that. What else? What else do you think this poem is about based on your reading?
It's about the person trying to rent a house, but he was discriminated because of his skin color.
Okay, so that is a kind of summary of the plot or the summary of the poem. This is the set, right? This is the set. Anybody else want to add anything else to what Alice and Aimee has said?
I feel like the landlady was trying her best to be polite in a British manner. But
I hope I played that role
because,
very well.
yes. Because I noticed in America there's a different lingo when it comes to conversations between two different races. But in British, they pride themselves in being polite. So that is why she didn't mention the word African. She mentioned, is it dark or very light or how light? Because she is concerned about that.
Yeah, I think that there is something to explore that for the unsaid. That is the obvious, right? Wole Soyinka plays with that element of politeness, but yet there is a sense of racist attitude behind that politeness, right? So I want you to kind of keep that in mind. All right, good. What else? What else did you see in this poem?
I sort of think like this poem has sort of like a funny kind of humorous thing going on. Like the conversation itself is funny, but this topic is quite serious. Which is something I think that is very common. Yeah, it's humorous, but at the same time, you can't pass off the racism.
Good. Lisa, put the word humor in, if you have a paper, if you've got notebook there, put the word humor there, and then brainstorm. What do you understand humor to mean? What are the different types of humor? Humor can mean witty, being very clever with words, right? A lot of, if you read plays by William Shakespeare, especially his comedy, right? He plays with words a lot. That's very witty. Then humor or comedy has another darker level of it where, it's more physical. the slapstick humor. There's a lot of physicality, like slipping off the banana peel and falling on your head, stuff like that. Those kinds of quote unquote humor, right? But what is the tone of this poem? Is it humorous as in ha ha ha, this is so funny? Is it humorous as in is it witty, he's being very clever with words? What is the tone? Explore that a little bit more. That will help you get to the unsaid as well. Okay, good. What else? Was there anything in this poem that left you disturbed?
Doctor, I just want to ask, the one that lipstick coated, long gold rolled. I'm not sure because it gives me an impression that it's she's not meeting the guy yet because it's for her own safety. So I'm not sure because she wears lipstick, but I don't know. Yeah.
Looking for this.
And I also noticed during the first paragraph of the poem, he stated that he doesn't want to waste time and rightly straight away telling the woman, the landlord, that he's an African. So it's kind of give me an impression that he already knows that he might be turned down because he's an African.
What's the word that hints that?
I hated wasted journey.
Just a second. I was Googling for Shah. Just a second. Where is
Sorry.
No. Where is
But yeah, just to add on to Aimi's point, because he said I am African even before she asked, because he kind of knew that the moment he reached there, they will turn him down most likely.
But I'll come back to that. Shah, this is the lipstick holder.
I feel like
Sorry,
this is a
this is the
typical,
cigarette. This is the cigarette holder. So you can
It's like the
imagine,
typical,
didn't Edna in The Incredibles also use this anyway? So it could be.
She
I can't
smokes in
remember.
there? I can't
Sorry?
remember. I can't remember if she smokes in there.
Yeah, there was one
But this is
scene.
a
When
a
Mr.
a
Incredible
typical British landlady,
this has a kind of a as a kind of a class to it. So this is the cigarette holder. So imagine she used this end and there is a lipstick mark on it, right? So this is the cigarette holder. So that's the element of it. Back to what Aimi said. Just a second. Okay, Aimi, could you repeat what you said again?
In the first paragraph, there's a line where he's
Paragraph?
phrase.
Say astaghfirullah. Paragraph. There is no paragraph in poems. How do you refer to it? I'm being cheeky. Sorry.
Sorry, doctor.
Yes. How do you?
Line 5.
It's a stanza. There's no paragraphs. First rule of business when we come to reading poems, there is no paragraphs, right? So I'm being cheeky, Aimi. Don't take offense. Okay. So the line. So the entire poem is presented as one stanza, but the line. Could you read that line for me?
In the line, I hated a wasted journey. I am African. It kind of implies that he already knows that he is about to be turned down just because he was an African, but he just wanna give his shot just in case maybe. So it's kind of sad to know that he already knows about the double standard.
But read me the line before that. Spot on, Aimi, but read me the line before that.
But self-confession, madam, I warned. I hate a wasted journey. I am African. The sentence I warn, it kind of state that he
Also,
already it.
good. Also, the word nothing remained but self-confession. What is the unsaid there? What is he confessing for? Has he done some crime?
No, but maybe
What
just
is his?
being a black person, it's a crime for itself.
So that word self-confession, the poet leaves certain things unsaid. That's an example of a gap or silence in the text, right? The poet puts the word self-confession there, asking you and I as readers to look at it and ask ourselves, why is he confessing? Did he do something wrong? Is he a criminal? Is he confessing because he did, we talk about confession. What context do you confess? In what context would you confess? Imagine, you at home, you're supposed to do something and mom asks you to do something and you're like, you completely forgot because you've got work for Dr. Rai and you finished the work and you're like, oh my God, I completely forgot. And then at night you have to tell your mom, Mommy, sorry, I forgot to do that. You're basically confessing for something you have done. But in this case, what is he confessing for?
Or his skin color or his potential skin color.
Develop that further. What is he confessing for? Explore that further.
His identity.
He's
an
confessing
African?
for his identity. Spot on. High five. He's confessing for his identity. Do you need to confess for your identity? Do you need to say, sorry, I am Malaysian? Sorry, I am Muslim. Sorry, I am X, Y, or Z. Sorry, I am of this demographic. Sorry, I'm a woman. Do you need to apologize for your identity?
No.
So that tells you the theme of this poem. That comes to the core of the poem's theme, if you like, right? So what Ruby has said, what Aimee has said, what Alice has said, these are important elements of the poem as a whole for you to understand. And these are elements of things that are said, that are obvious, right? But the poet also includes in the text certain elements, maybe a word, maybe an expression, maybe an image that hints at the things he is not telling you, the unsaid. Okay, so our task is to break the puzzle and like figure out like what is he trying to tell us by not telling us, just by putting the word self-confession. Okay, so that's the value of it. So let's proceed further with the task. I'll come to let me share the screen. I'll come to your take on this poem after today's session, after the lecture slot. But as you listen to the lecture, what I want you to do is keep having thoughts down, like just write these thoughts down, right? Capture your ideas. So it's just constantly have a dialogue. So when you are reading any works of literature for intensive purposes, not extensive, like I said, extensive, reading it for pleasure. You're just reading it for the fun of it. You just kind of like enjoy the story. But as a student of literature, I need you to read it intensively, ask questions, okay? So thank you for keeping your cameras on. You can switch off your cameras now. We're going to go to the lecture. But when we have our discussion, I would like to see your faces. It will help with each other's engagement. Thank you. So back to our lecture. So the approach that we take in class is, when we are looking at a particular text and we are asking ourselves, what is the theme that this particular poem or short story or novel is telling me or is informing me? So you as a student of literature, you will receive plenty of suggestions, but you need to follow your nose. It's a metaphor meaning, you need to go with what your instinct tells you, what you're reading this text, and certain words stand out, certain words leave you disturbed, certain words leave you unsettled, right? And you need to ask yourself, what is it about the unsettled ideas that hints at the unsaid, the silences, the things that the author is not telling me, but in fact indirectly telling me, that's the theme that you need to explore. Okay, so I need you to kind of keep that in mind. So for today's discussion, the parameter 1, thematic concern, I am suggesting that identity as a possible thematic reading. Of course, there are many themes. You know, themes are not solely focusing on issue of identity. But I just want to kind of introduce one possible theme. At the end of today's session, there is a short video that I will share on how to explore a theme of a work of literature that you may watch on your own to kind of ask yourself questions of theme for any text that you read. So talk about identity markers as a point of comparison. So when we think about identity markers, as we established just now, based on what Aimee picked up on, that self-confession part. Why is he confessing? What is he confessing for? As Fuzla has said, for his identity. So let's bring up this idea of identity as a possible theme in literature. I'm going to ask you this question. What is your identity markers? How do you identify yourself as a person? This is something I will always keep asking you in terms of your point of reference. Begin with you as a reader, then approach the text. Don't go straight to the text without asking yourself those kinds of issues. Then ask yourself questions like, when we talk about identity, how is this theme of identity comparable across time and space, across different works of literature? More so in the context of a multicultural society, you know, we established that like Iraq, China, Malaysia, we all share a similar kind of a multicultural landscape. So within your respective context, how is identity an important element, you know, in the society? What is the identity markers in your own respective context? So this is something to kind of begin the premise of discussion with, okay? Then when we talk about the politics of identity, this is an important quote that I want to kind of like unpack. How do individuals understand who they are in political terms, and on what basis do groups of people come together to advance common political aims? This will help you understand identity politics, right? So in other words, what are the sources of collective political identity? So this comes from a particular reference, Castleman's work. But to kind of explore this further, the politics of collective identity involves the struggle to define groups as full participants of the society. But that element of participation may be from a marginalized or ostracized point of view, right? So the politics, if you like, involves a kind of tug of war, that element of power tug of war, right? Between those who are in the position of influence and those who are in the position of the subordinate. So politically, this is the idea of identity politics, but that is coming from the discipline of political science. And then we're appropriating this into the reading of literature. So this is where the American School of Comparative Literature allows us to bring theories into the reading of works of fiction. Okay, so you already can tell which school of thought we are associating with, right? At least at this point. Then when you explore the theme of identity politics within comparative literature, there are many communities or groups that you can kind of problematize. You can categorize them either as marginalized, subaltern, minority, disabled, even by their sexual preferences. So that helps define the scope of reading. Okay, so identity politics may be the bigger umbrella, but under that, you can even subcategorize them, okay? So the text that we're going to be discussing today, for instance, you may ask yourself, is the identity of the community in question falling within the category of the marginalized, the subaltern, the minority, the disabled, the sexual preference, you know, what form, right? So you may look at it as minorities within a colonial, post-colonial context. You may look at it as members of migrant communities, right? Minorities within a migrant communities. There are many kind of hyphenated identities that can be taken into consideration. So identity politics is the larger umbrella. Then you have the breakdown of that. This will be a lot clearer when we start looking at the poems in question. And this is something that we also need to take into consideration when we talk about identity politics. This comes from the works of Margaret Anderson and Patricia Collins. This idea of shifting the center. So the first 5 weeks, we looked at how the definition of comparative literature in the 20th century was predominantly Anglo-American and Euro-Anglo-American based, right? So now the center has been shifted. We're incorporating definitions of comparative literature coming from outside the Western universities, right? From the Chinese perspective, the Indian perspective, and elsewhere in the world. So this metaphor of shifting the center, we can also take it as a kind of a reading approach in the parameters that we use, right? So, and I want to draw our attention to this particular quote. Shifting the center means what? Quote, and I quote, it means putting at the center of our thinking the experiences of groups who have formerly been excluded. Without doing so, many groups simply remain invisible. When they are seen, they are typically judged through the experiences of the white people rather than understood on their own terms. This establishes a false norm through which all groups are judged. So let's unpack this. There's a lot of gems in this short quote in itself. So you have the idea of shifting the center. So from this particular quote, the unsaid is the bit that Anderson and Collins do not say is, where is the center? They hint at it, but they don't tell us in overt terms. The center can be seen from, it can be inferred from the 1, 2, 3, the third sentence, right? Typically judged through the experiences of white people. So the center can be seen as experiences of the white people. But if you shift the center, what does that imply? The implication is that you are now looking at groups that were once seen as invisible, quote unquote invisible, quote unquote excluded, formerly excluded. So coming back to the communities that are included in the discussion of identity politics, the marginalized, the subaltern, the minorities, the disabled, the sexual, homosexuals, and whatever communities, migrants, the refugees. So whatever the communities, that still falls within this umbrella of discussion leaks, as Anderson and Collins talks about shifting the center. So you as readers will then have to decide, I'm reading this particular text, what community is being highlighted in this poem or in this story, in this text? Which community that were once excluded or marginalized is now being brought to the fore through this discussion? Okay, I'll come to this in a second. So let's look at the poem in question. Back to the poem that we have today. So which community is that was once marginalized or invisible or even muted is brought to the fore in this particular poem?
British African people who live in Britain.
Okay. What else? And we know this from this particular line, right? I am African, right? You know this, there is that hint. What else?
Maybe people with color, skin
People
color.
of color.
Yeah.
All right. What else?
Would it be like people from higher ups, like class?
Higher class? Are they the ones excluded and they are now brought
Sorry.
into,
I think it's
so
in the
reverse that. Maybe the working class, maybe the lower class, right? So you can start to unpack just by looking at this poem, by asking those kinds of pertinent questions, right? Asking questions like, the experience, which group is being represented in this text, whose experiences are being represented. And you ask this by asking yourself also, they were once formerly excluded and now they are brought to the fore. They were once invisible and now they are made more visible. Yeah, their voices were once muted and now their voices are made clear. So in order to, another way of looking at it is, whose point of view is this poem presenting the issue? Is it the point of view of the center, or is it the point of view of those communities that were once excluded and invisible, right? Because when the text is told from the experiences of the white, they see the world from that perspective, the white people's perspective. But the minute you are able to capture the text, the minute the writer captures the text from the experiences of people who were once excluded, colonized, made invisible, muted, whatever, yeah, i.e., the minority, the subalterns, the marginalized, the minute the poet positions those individuals as the storyteller of their own stories, capturing their voice and their perspective, you know the element of shifting the center has already taken place, right? So in Langston Hughes, for instance, first line, I too sing America. So the fact that the persona is the one representing his positionality as America, despite being quote unquote the darker brother, already also tells you, right? There is a shift in perspective. It's not seen from the white perspective, but seen from the darker brother's perspective. And likewise, a couple of weeks ago, we looked at Mahmoud Darwish's identity card. Again, same thing. Write down, I am an Arab, right? Because in the context of the Palestinian-Israeli situation, the Arab Palestinian, they are the marginalized, the subalterns, they are the victims, they are being occupied, right? So now in this particular poem, the shift is the poet is bringing to the fore the voice of the marginalized, i.e. the Arabs, the darker brother, and telephone conversation, also the same, right? And in this particular poem, we're not too sure how to position the persona. The fact that he is an African. So what is he doing in Britain? What is he doing in this context? Is he a student? Is he a migrant worker? Is he a refugee? All those things are not sure. We're not sure of, because if he had said, I am British, but my skin is darker, then it's a different case, right? So if you think about Langston Hughes, first line is, I too sing America. I'm not a migrant. I'm not a refugee. I'm not I'm not an indentured laborer. I'm not none of those. I am America, but I am the darker brother, right? And in this poem, I am an Arab. I might not be Palestinian. Write down, I am an Arab. So there is a kind of an othering happening, right? The unsaid there. In Langston Hughes, there is a kind of like, I'm part of you, but you have put me as the other, right? But in this poem, we are kind of hinted, we're told that this situation is happening in Britain. You see that from the imageries portrayed, right? The omnibus buses, the phone booth, the red pillar boxes. So you're hinted at, okay, this is happening in London, but the persona says he is African down in his passport, right? So What's the context? Why is an African doing, what is an African doing in Britain? You know, so there is a slight difference in terms of identity politics. So are you okay so far?
Yes, doctor.
Yes.
So far, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But just curious about something, Doctor.
Go ahead, Ruby.
I have this question popping in my head. How do we decide the center, of which we are providing the marginalized voice to, if it makes sense? Because the typical definition is center is always white. However, if we go to translated works, or works that are not set in a Western society, so to speak, then we can replace whiteness with, say, majority dominant ruling power in a certain country.
Absolutely. So if you remember from this particular quote, did I put this? Okay. This element of the constant tug of war, right, between the haves and have-not, between those who are in positions of power and influence and those who are ostracized and marginalized. You're right. The hegemony is not just a black-white issue, right? The hegemony may be happening within a particular community, within a society, within a nation state. Between those in in positions of power and those who are ostracized and marginalized, as it says here. But it all depends on the choice of text, on your choice of text. So the 3 poems that I have given you thus far, including today's, share something in common. The context may be different, but there are kind of points of comparison that we can draw from the two, and we'll get into that in a minute. But you are absolutely right. You need to be able to identify the center in order for you to then be able to ascertain which communities or societies, which groups are involved in this society. So the hint comes from the first 2 sentences here. Experiences of people who were formerly excluded. Then ask yourself, in this context, who have always been included? Is it whites? Is it a particular racial group? Is it particular members of a particular religious group? Is it members of a particular class? In this collection, the short story, there's one particular short story I drew your attention to previously, Mahasweta Devi's Dowli. The center, if you like, are the Brahmins, those of the higher caste of the Indian caste system. Because the story Dowli is the story of the untouchable, a girl from the untouchable society. So the excluded one, if you like, or the one previously invisible, a member of a particular subaltern community, the untouchable. So the lowest caste in the caste system in the Indian context. So yeah, each context will be will inform you something valuable. So that also brings you to what I reminded you at the beginning. If you remember from Basnett's quote from Basnett's work, comparative literature, you need to know the context of reference, okay? So don't just read the text or read the story on its own. You have to position it within the context. And then that will help you identify the communities that are being marginalized. That will also help you identify where the center previously was and where the center is now, as seen in this particular story. Does that answer the question, Ruby?
Yes, because I was wondering, how do we translate an application in different corpus, in different power dynamics? That's all.
So each good question. Each text will inform you of its power dynamics, quote unquote power dynamics. There isn't one. It's not as simple as black and white, because obviously there is heterogeneity in the society today, in the world today, right? So yeah, so that will help you understand those who are invisible.
All right, thank you, Doctor.
Welcome. And something else I want you to kind of like think about, members of society, when they capture their experiences, they are championing, they are asking for their rights in society. This is where identity politics is rooted in. When a particular marginalized society captures their experience and wants their voices heard, they are in fact championing for what Charles Taylor talks about, recognition politics. They want to be recognized, right? But another dimension, writers may also capture the misrecognition that's happening in society. So writers don't just capture the recognition that they want for their community. So writers may also capture the opposite, meaning what's really happening is not recognition. What's really happening is the misrecognition. So I want to draw your attention to this quote by Charles Taylor from his inaugural lecture called The Politics of Recognition. When he unpacks misrecognition, what do we mean by that? And I quote, "Our identity is partly shaped by recognition or its absence, often by misrecognition of others. And so a person or group of people can suffer real damage, real distortion, if people or society around them mirror back to them a confining or demeaning or contemptible picture of themselves." All right? Non-recognition or misrecognition can inflict harm, can be a form of oppression, imprisoning someone in a false, distorted, and reduced mode of being. So let's just understand this a little bit. When the center, back to this, when the center mirrors to you, shows you that your identity is X. This might not be your identity, but the center says your identity is X. That's it. That's who you are. Okay. That's a kind of misrecognition, because you have to decide what your identity is. Collectively, as a community, you must be the one deciding, right? In this poem by Langston Hughes, the American society mirrors to the darker brother that he cannot sit at the kitchen when company comes, right? He cannot be part of the table. He cannot be part of the conversation, right? He's not included. That's what the society mirrors to him. But Langston Hughes, through this poem, reversed the misrecognition by saying that tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. There will come a time when my identity will be recognized. Today, my identity is misrecognized. I'm not given the space at the table, right? But one day, my identity will be recognized. And when that happens, those people who misrecognize me, they will be ashamed. So this is a kind of like a very political statement. This is how writers use their poetic license to make certain political statements about issues of recognition and misrecognition. So I want to draw your attention to this as well. A third and final concept within identity, issues of identity, that I want to draw your attention to before we go into the text. Consider also the issue of double consciousness. So when a member of a minority is being represented, you can either represent it as a kind of you're championing to be heard, you want to be included, you want your sense of identity to be visible. That's one reason, why, if you like, the writer for capturing it in the text. You've got Mahmoud Darwish saying, write it down. I am an Arab. So there is that kind of overt sense of, I want my voice heard, I want to make myself more visible, put it down. So there is a kind of a statement he's making. And then there is also another why when the writer uses identity as a theme in their works of literature, to also capture experiences of the marginalized, experiences of people who are misrecognized, whose identity has been falsely represented, or even distorted. Think about, in your when you do colonial readings in with your other courses, think about how the natives were represented by the colonial masters in Malaya, for instance. The Malays were considered lazy, quote unquote lazy, were captured in stories, either dark or muted or lazy. Somerset Maugham's works, Conrad's works, right? Even in The Heart of Darkness, when Joseph Conrad captures his experience, moving through the rivers of Congo, he captures the Africans very much in the shadows. They're sailing down the river, and it looks as if the Africans are part of the darkness in Africa, part of the shadows. So he captures them as distorted images, right? But the poet today the writers today may want to capture Africa from a more center stage position. So you will have Trevor Noah when we read Born a Crime. The communities that were once excluded or made invisible are now telling their story, right? In Trevor Noah's in Trevor Noah's Born a Crime, he is telling his story as a member of the South African community, right? He's also telling his mom's story as a Black woman, as a Xhosa woman in South Africa. So these are ways the writer may shift the center. But a third way that we need to also take into consideration is, how does the writer capture the experience of feeling marginalized, but also understanding the white people's point of view, or the positions of authorities' point of view? This is what W.E. Du Bois talks about in his essay, The Souls of Black Folk, this concept called double consciousness. There's a kind of two-ness, there's a kind of, in your mind, you are able to see your perspective, but you are also able to see how others view you, right? This is something that those in positions of authority cannot do. They tend to see things from their perspective, but those from the marginalized are usually able to see how the majority sees them and how they themselves view their identity. So let's have a look at this particular quote from Du Bois. And I quote, "It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, measuring one's soul by the tape of the world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever sees his two-ness, as an American, as a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two wearing ideals, in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder." So you are always mindful, as a minority, you are always mindful how others view you. You will see this very much so in in Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. You will see this idea of double consciousness. So especially in Born a Crime and The Bamboo Stalk, where the element, especially by cultural individuals, you see yourself not belonging to any one group, but you see yourself belonging to both groups and being able to see how both groups view you, right? So this element of double consciousness. Any questions here? Any questions?
So far, I'm okay. Thank you, Doctor.
All right, thank you. So before we go into the text, so I've introduced you to three poems so far, right? The last 5 weeks. You had I Too to begin with, and then a couple of weeks later, you had Identity Card by Mahmoud Darwish, I Too by Langston Hughes, then you had Identity Card by Mahmoud Darwish, then you compared those two. Then today, I'm introducing you a third text, the Nigerian poet Wole Soyinka, and his poem Telephone Conversation, which is set in Britain. So just looking at those three texts, these are possible ways to read comparative literature, the approaches to read comparative literature for thematic concern. Okay, so this is the methodology I'm going to share with you. So one possible way is to look at the theme of identity politics and ask yourself these research questions. Number one, how is the issue of power struggle captured across time and space? The power struggle in Identity Card compared to the power struggle in I Too, for instance. And the power struggle in Telephone Conversation, right? So just looking at the theme of identity politics and asking yourself in terms of the issue of power struggle. Who are the groups at tug of war in each context, and how are they similar in their experience, and how do they differ? What does the context of each poem how does the context of each poem help you as the reader explore the themes of Identity Card? So let's look at I Too. The context is the America, USA in the 1940s, 30s, 40s, even 50s. The issue of race politics in America, the contestation between the whites and the blacks. Then you had Identity Card by Mahmoud Darwish. You had a Palestinian capturing the experience of being in the occupied context by the oppressors, the Israelis. Then you had the Nigerian poet, capturing the experience of being an African in Britain. So in that context, being maybe a migrant, maybe even being a student, depending on the context, but basically migrant in the context of migrants, not a member of society, right? The third, how are the three poems' representation of identity politics comparable? You then decide, how are they comparable? How are they similar? Keeping in mind, number one, they are all male writers. They are all capturing voices of the marginalized in different contexts of marginalization, right? But they come from three different geographical locations, three different time and space, okay? That allows you to find points of convergence, but also points of divergence on this theme of identity politics. So this is one methodology, okay? A second methodology is if I wanted to look at Du Bois's double consciousness, I just want to focus on the double consciousness. You may consider how each persona, I Too, Identity Card, Telephone Conversation, how each persona, not each poet, how each persona experiences this element of two-ness, how they experience the element of two-ness within their respective context. So how is double consciousness experienced in each poem? How does it affect the persona's sense of identity? What aspects of the other is experienced by the marginalized characters? The other in the context of each poem are those of position of authority or position of power, right? And the fourth question, how are the three poems comparable in their representation of double consciousness? So this is another methodology to look at the theme of identity, right? Using a particular concept, a particular theoretical concept called double consciousness, taken from W.E. Du Bois. So these are the three poems. The question I'm throwing to you is, consider how identity is problematized in each poem. Okay, how is identity problematized in each poem? When does identity appear to matter? Right? Wole Soyinka is in this poem that the persona is trying to rent a room, and identity seems to matter here. Mahmud Darwish is trying to come back to his home, and he's trying to cross the border, and his identity seems to matter. And Langston Hughes, he just wants to come and sit at the dinner table and eat with everybody else, and yet his identity seems to be standing in the way, right? So identity is problematized at different contexts, be it in private domain, in public domains, but the issue of identity allows these three texts, especially identities of the marginalized, the subalterns, to be read across time and space. So this is how you can compare three texts that seemingly are from three different geographical locations, and yet comparative literature allows you to kind of group them together, and you are able to read them across time and space, across geographical borders. All right. So basically, that's the lecture, and for this particular theme, as well as for seminar, your second assignment, you may choose to read the text using this particular theme and comparing any of these texts. So as I said, you may choose to read Telephone Conversation and compare it with Identity Card. You may even choose to read all three poems, right? Next week, we will explore the issue of identity further by looking at the identity of the Iraqis, looking at specifically the two texts, the Yellow Bird and the Corpse Washer. We're just looking at these two texts, but also exploring the issue of identity. One, from an outsider perspective. The Yellow Bird is from the outsider, from the American soldier's perspective, as a soldier in Iraq, and another one is from the insider's perspective, from Sinan Antun's in Iraqi himself. And how does he capture? And both are set within the same context, right? So Kevin Powers' The Yellow Bird is an American novel set in the American literary canon, American war novel. Sinan Antun's The Corpse Washer is also a war novel set in Iraq. It's an Iraqi novel. So we are crossing two geographical borders, but the contexts are exactly the same. War in Iraq. The setting is exactly the same. War in Iraq. But one captures it from an outsider's perspective, another captures it from an insider's perspective. So that's another way of reading text, approaching text for comparative literature. So these three poems, the contexts are different, right? One is an African American situation, another one is the Palestinian situation, a third is the African situation in Britain, right? You are comparing it for the issue of representation of the minorities' identity, the marginalized sense of identity, looking at identity politics. Next week, we're looking at similar contexts, the similar setting, but told from two different perspectives, from the American soldier's perspective, from the Iraqis' perspective. Of course, identity politics can also be read in other novels, but these other novels, we will explore it further in the coming parameters. All right, any questions? Can I have everyone's camera back on?
Okay, Doctor. For the seminar, we should choose the poems, or we can also choose the novels to compile.
Okay, so you're going straight to the assignment now.
I just want to ask about it, so I can decide well what I can focus on.
Okay, all right. Before you go into the seminar, there is an e-task on UKM Folio that you need to do. Okay, that is e-task number 2. Remember, you've got 5 e-tasks, right? And those 5 e-tasks carries 20 marks. You have done 1, well done. You have 4 more. So the first e-task for the application is already up on UKM Folio. Let me show you the screen. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So, so you have done, where is it? You've done the first e-task, the first assignment. For next week's work, these are some resources that you may find useful. I actually have 2 articles on that I wrote with a friend of mine on Kevin Powers' The Yellowbird and Sinan Antun's Corpse Washer. One has already been accepted for publication, but we are still waiting for the paper to be published. So once I get it, I'll share it with you. The second one I'm finishing to send to a journal, so I can't share any aspects from that yet because it's still being considered for publication. But I will share some of the fundamentals. But these are possible resources, and then there is the e-task. So the e-task is basically today's class, what we did in today's class. So you may choose. You may choose any of the 2 or 3 poems and read it for any of these issues. This is more like a practice run. Look at the e-task as a kind of like you trying some ideas out, because the e-task will require you to spend maybe half an hour at most, for an e-task. I'm not expecting you to spend days with PowerPoints, nothing like that. Just half an hour capturing what we have discussed today, right? Exploring the issue a little bit and then capturing it in a form of writing or in a form of PowerPoint slides or even in a form of video essay if you feel comfortable that way, whatever works. But you need to do this task in order to fulfill the 5 e-tasks for 20%. And then the question that, are you clear on that, everybody?
Yes, Doctor.
All right, then the question that Alice asked just now. The seminar. Can you see the page I'm sharing right now? The
Yes,
course
yes.
file? The course file? Okay. So we are currently at week 6, all right? We will do week 6 and 7, and then you will have a mid-semester break. So the seminar that you have to work on, is it big enough? Okay. The question is very broad, very open-ended. Comparative literature and national literary canon, convergence of theme stroke issue across national borders. Using any text set in 2 separate national canon, examine the above mentioned theme. Define the converging theme in the 2 chosen corpus and consider how it is problematized across national borders. So if you remember, this is exactly the question I'm asking here. Sorry, here. How is the theme of identity problematized in this poem? how is the theme of identity problematized in this poem? And again, in this poem. So I'm asking you the same question, right? Which means you can use the same approach and you can use the same corpus. But if you choose to use other corpuses besides the poems, you can too. It's just that once you have done something, you have started to do something, you might find that it's a lot easier to just expand on it rather than go to something else. However, based on the consultation that I had with almost all of you last week, I would say about 50% of the class have already gotten a second assignment, this assignment in mind, as you're preparing for your first assignment. When you were talking to me about the video essay, a couple of you, if I'm not mistaken, 2 or 3 of you have already thought, I'm already going to do this. The next assignment, I've already gotten some ideas. So I leave it to you. The text that I have asked you to read, you will be asked to do e-task on them. You will have e-task to do for each of these, comparison, the comparative element to it. So e-task number 3 will be to compare the yellow bird and the quartz washer. 4 will be to compare, I forget. Well, basically looking at these parameters, okay? So you will have opportunities to explore them. But if you want to take the e-task and expand that into your seminar, the second assignment, you can. Okay, because like I said, the e-task will be around half an hour's work. That's a kind of a ballpark figure I'm looking at. But the seminar would require you to do a lot more in-depth work. Like, if you ask yourself, how long did it take me to do the video essay? Most probably about maybe 2 weeks, collectively with other tasks at hand, a lot of reading. Some of you saw me like 2 or 3 times for consultation, right? So collectively, it's a lot of work, right? A lot of hours of work. So that's for 20%, right? The same thing with seminar, it's a 20% work. But for the e-task, I'm not expecting you to do that much because it's 20%, but for 5 tasks. So each one carries, 4 marks. So I'm not expecting that much of time. Just a second. Any other questions?
My question is basically about the identity politics, right? Oh, right there. Did she run away from me? It's okay. All right. So, Dr. you're muted, Dr.
Sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's okay. I was
So
just
I'm trying to get my husband to switch off his alarm because his alarm just switched on. Yeah.
okay. No, I'm just very obsessed about this, deciding the center and deciding the marginalized, because a lot of the books that I'm really interested in are translated works, and most of them are about Muslim identities within that Muslim countries themselves. So when I choose a translated work, say, how do you, because most characters will be Muslims in a Muslim majority country. So how do we represent them as marginalized, even though we know that they are marginalized, say Muslim women and whatnot? So I wonder, like Orhan Pamuk, right? Turkish identity. Of course, he himself as an individual in the character, they are marginalized. But how do we posit the center of the society and the character? So that is just what I'm wondering about. If the characters belong to a majority predominant group. Yeah.
Okay. Good question. But the issue is not every text will have the issue of the center and the marginalized, right? You need to make the selection of text, and then you need to ask yourself, what theme comes across for me in this text? So the discussion that I am introducing to you today is based on these 3 poems. Based on I2, based on identity card, based on telephone conversation, right? So the way you will approach the text is also informed by what the text is telling you. So if the issue is identity within a Muslim context, what other elements are being problematized in that context? What other elements of maybe identity, maybe other themes that are being problematized? That's where you need to kind of decide. So remember, the first parameter is thematic concern, not identity politics. Right? The first parameter is thematic concern, and identity politics is just one example. Okay, I also would like to suggest this because I know your reading list from your other courses. Dr. Shan's course, some of you are doing Dr. Mel's course, Dr. Zalina's course, right? So look at those texts as possible text selection for this assignment. Because in that particular course, in whatever your other courses are, you don't get to read it comparatively. You read the text for itself, right? But for this particular course, you get to bring two texts from two different contexts and compare them. So work smart that way. That way you are exploring the text read in other courses, but expanding your horizon by reading it comparatively. Do you understand? Okay, good. Any other question? So just to go quickly around the class, how many of you kind of know what you want to work on for your seminar? Can I have a show of hands? Do you see that raise hand caption underneath? Just how many of you kind of know what you want to work on for your seminar?
Well, like not confidently though, doctor. Like I think most of us would have some ideas though.
No, what I mean is, do you have a text? You have text in mind. You have the corpus already in mind. Do you know which novels or short stories or poems you want to work on? Can I just have a show of hand? No? Okay. Okay, cool. That's all right. That's all right. Which means if you look at, let me just share the screen one more time. I don't want to talk assignment because we all just finished one assignment, right? It's such a bore to talk about assignment, right? But since Alice asked, you will have 1 week in week 8 when you do a consultation with me for the second assignment, just to kind of like kind of preamble the discussion. So we are currently in week 6. That will be week 7, and then you will have 1 week mid-semester break for Eid. Then you come back. When you come back, you will have workshop week 1 for preparation for the seminar. So this is the time when you meet me like you did last week, and as many times as you want, bringing in your ideas, your drafts, and then we kind of like explore that, and I help you kind of unpack that. Okay, but just to kind of, because I like the idea of telling students in advance what the task is, because subconsciously your mind is working, whether you realize it or not, because once you've been exposed to it, your subconscious mind is already beginning to think about it. So don't wait until week 8. Oh my God, I just made a rhyme. Don't wait till week 8. Oh, wow. Okay. Don't wait until this particular slot before you're like, okay, let's look at the question. What is it about? What is it asking me? Which text shall I choose? Don't do that. Start thinking about it even now. Okay. So have a look at the task. Using 2 texts set in 2 national canon. That's what our course is about, right? We're reading texts across national canons. Examine the above mentioned themes. What's the above mentioned theme? Comparative literature and national literary canon. Convergence of themes and issues across national borders. First clue, you can't take 2 texts from the same national borders, right? Second clue, can I bring translated works? Yeah, it doesn't say anything about language, right? but it has to cross borders. Okay? And how do you present this? This would be in a form of a seminar. You will present it, I said Friday, sorry, it should be Thursday, our class lah. Thursday afternoon, our class basically. Okay? Does that help? So I'm not expecting you to already think that you have an answer, but I'm just curious in case any of you have something you've already thought of. If you don't, that's fine. In fact, if you don't, you may consider looking at the yellow bird and corpse washer. Because we're going to discuss that next week anyway, right? You may want to expand that. But you may have, like I said, based on last week's consultation, a few of you have very good ideas that you already like, you know what, I want to explore this. Like, okay, go for that, right? So I don't want you to work, like start from scratch, because the corpse washer, the yellow bird, the 3 poems that we've been discussing, we've been talking about that. We will be talking about that in class. So you may begin on that, but you find your own unique perspective. You notice when we talked about I2 and identity card a few weeks ago, each of you had a very unique perspective. I like your individual takes. Go back and watch the video of that class, right? The same will happen for corpse washer and the yellow bird. Listen to the title, Yellow Bird, Corpse Washer. You know, it's two very different perspective, and yet the story is about the war in Iraq, the situation in Iraq. One told from a outsider's perspective, one told from the insider's perspective. As you're reading the novels, I hope you've started reading it, and please finish reading it for next week. So the task for next week is I want to hear your take on the 2 novels. I'm going to try to organize to get my PhD student who is in Iraq, who's working on Sinan Antun's 3 novels for his PhD thesis. I'm trying to organize for him to come and give us a short lecture on Sinan Antun. All right. It will be good for him, but it is also good for us. But because of the time, you know, the time difference and whether or not, because he's a full-time lecturer as well at the university, in Iraq. So I'm going to try to organize that. So it would be nice to kind of have a fresh perspective of Sinan Antun from a researcher's perspective, but you yourself must also have some idea because you have read the novels. Yeah, you haven't read all of Sinan Antun's novels, but you would have read The Corpse Washer, which is a translation, right? And The Yellow Bird. Okay? Simple question to ask yourself is, oh, sorry, I forgot to share this, didn't I? Simple question to ask yourself. I'm not sure whether you can hear the voice if I showed this, whether the audio it works. We'll end with this. I hope it works.
The process of doing second draft.
Just a second, I haven't shared the screen. Okay. Please tell me if you can hear the voice, the audio, sorry.
Yes, I think it's clear. Yes or no?
Can you hear the audio?
Yes, doctor. Right?
Can you hear this? Can you see what I'm sharing right now?
Yes, doctor.
It's just short, you know. It's a fresh perspective on how to find a theme, you know. So be open-minded about the way he is expressing his ideas, but just have a listen on how to find a theme. I will share this video also on our WhatsApp group as well as on UKM Folio. You may watch it again when you are trying to ascertain what is the theme of the yellow bird as you see it. Don't go online and look at other people's opinions about the corpse washer and the yellow bird. Ask yourself, what is my take on these these two novels, and how are they comparable? Basically, the theme must be the same. Okay, but let's have a look on how to identify a theme, and we will end with this session.
Doctor,
Oh,
we can't seem to hear
we
the audio.
cannot hear the voice, Doctor.
Oh, you see.
But what you can do is, I think you can just share on WhatsApp, then you can give us 5-6 minutes to watch it first.
Yes, doctor. I think so.
I don't know how to share the audio. That's something I've been working on.
Yeah, but I think with YouTube, that's the problem. Yeah.
Why? Huh?
I'm not sure why. I'm like, because there's no mechanism to just share YouTube videos specifically. So yeah, usually what me and my other people do is just we share on WhatsApp the video itself.
Okay. So I have shared it with you. I will leave you to apa nama? I will leave you to watch it on your own. We'll pick it up for next week because I know you all have another class. Dr. Mel's class has been shifted to 4 o'clock instead of 2. For Aimi, Shah, and Fuzla, you guys are doing Dr. Mel's class. Oh, and Lisa also. Yeah. So, but the rest, I would highly recommend Alice, Ruby, and Salim, if you can, to join in, because that is another parameter that you can use. Looking at the architecture as a kind of reading of text across time and space. So that's why I say, like Aimi, Shah, and Fuzla, whatever you're doing for Dr. Mel's class, you may look at it as this is looking at one text. Can I find another text from a different geographical location that I can compare with the text that I'm studying in Dr. Mel's class for those elements, the architectural elements, for instance? So that can be your approach to seminar as well as your final project. Do you understand? So work smart that way so that it doesn't tax you too much, because I know it can get quite tiring. And when you're doing so many different courses and every course requires you to do a lot of readings, right? Exploring. So I don't want to take too much time. I'm going to give you all some time off so that you all can rest before the next session. But I would like you to watch the video. I've shared it on WhatsApp. Watch the video. We'll start with that next week. And then inshallah, hopefully I will get my PhD student to also come in and talk to us. And then we will go into your take. I want you to prepare a short presentation, just an oral presentation. Basically, your reading of the yellow bird and the corpse washer. Okay, your preliminary reading. I don't expect in-depth reading. So maybe spend like 5 minutes each. All right, is that okay? Any questions? Inshallah. Any questions? Okay, I hope today's session I know it's a bit long. I hope today's session made sense. I hope you are able to understand the issues, the first parameter. We will pick up on the same thing and kind of like it will be evolved in the coming parameters. So you will see the parameters developing rather than changing completely. Okay, so there will be a kind of a development. We will pick it up in the coming weeks. So inshallah, I will see you next week. Fuzla, I would like to see you. Please remain. But for everybody else, thank you so much. Inshallah, I will see you next week. Next week will be Thursday. Next week will be Thursday at 12 o'clock. At 2 o'clock.
But doctor, just in case if I'm interested in something and just would like not an assignment meeting, just some ideas. Is it all right?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Just message me and tell me, can I meet you? Like for consultation. Like this is an ongoing process for all of us. So don't worry so much about that. Okay. So anytime you need to talk to me for consultation,
Just
for any
bounce
of the,
ideas mostly, just like
not a problem.
Yeah.
No problem. But I request permission from everybody that I will record that and I will share it with everybody, so that is part of our learning as a community of learners. So whatever consultation I do with Aimee or Shah or Lisa or Ruby or Fuzla or Ren or Salim, I will record it, upload it on my YouTube, and then I will share it back to you. So the knowledge comes back full swing, inshallah. Okay?
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, any questions? Aimee, okay?
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Yeah.
Fuzla, okay? I can't see your picture though. Salim, okay?
Yeah, Doctor, thank you so much.
All right. Fuzla, all right? Okay. Ruby, all right? Alice, I saw whoever was at the back passing by. Sorry to.
Oh, sorry, doctor. It's my
He will
boyfriend.
be. Oh, your father.
No,
Okay.
we come to Hainan to take the test for English major together. Actually, we haven't seen each other for half a year because of pandemic. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So you got a reunion there. Brilliant. Brilliant. Lisa, all right? Cool. Shah, okay? All right, brilliant. So I will see everybody next week, inshallah. Or before that, if you want to meet for consultation. Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yes, and enjoying the 4 o'clock session if you all can.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. See y'all.
Bye, doctor. See you.